Committee's chairman, Congressman Benny Thompson, said yesterday the panel would like to speak to former Vice President Mike Pence.
There were people who had gallows erected on the lawn of the Capitol, ostensibly to hang the vice president. His life was in danger. I would hope that he would do the right thing and come forward and voluntarily talk to the committee. Everybody there didn't have a security detail. So we'd like to know what his security detail told him was going on and what all went on. I think it's important that the public needs to know. This was the number 2 person in government.
A spokesperson for the committee confirms to NBC News that Pence has not been formally asked for an interview, but if offered, the committee would accept. We're also learning the committee has requested information from Fox News host Sean Hannity. In a letter sent to Hannity yesterday, the committee wrote that they are in possession of material that suggests he had, quote, advance knowledge regarding President Trump and his legal team's planning for January 6th.
Let's bring in right now Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He's a member of the Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack, author of the new memoir entitled Unthinkable Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. Can you shed any light on the Sean Hannity aspect of the story and your request that the Fox broadcaster come and testify before the committee?
Well, Sean Hannity is has become a figure of interest because he's a fact witness, obviously, to the planning that preceded both the attempt at a political coup on January 6th and also apparently organizing for the insurrection. And based on the evidence of the texts we've seen, it looks like he was very concerned about what was going to happen. And we just want to try to reconstruct the chronology of his involvement. Obviously, he's not a figure of interest because of whatever he may have said publicly, and we were very clear it has nothing to do with any of his public pronouncements. It all has to do with his role as a fact witness and a player in these events.
Well, we'd heard he was very concerned, obviously, because of the text that you all released, that Sean was very concerned about the violence that he saw on January the 6th. In fact, was trying to reach out to the president to get it stopped. Did you sense in the information that you have, do you have information suggesting he was just as concerned in the days leading up to January the 6th by what he was hearing?
Well, that's why we want to bring him in order to get a statement in his own voice. But those are the breadcrumbs that we've received, that he was very concerned about where things were going. Obviously, the president and his team were escalating their attacks on Mike Pence, their attacks on the election and the propagation of the big lie in the days in advance. So anybody on the inside who was privy to their conversations obviously would have known about where they were headed in terms of both the inside attack on Pence, the attempt to destroy Joe Biden's majority in the Electoral College vote, but also the eliciting of violence and insurrectionary movement in the streets.
It looks, Congressman, like you're not going to need to get Peter Navarro to come up to tell you how about his involvement, because he wrote it all in a book and then told Ari Melber about it yesterday in a pretty shocking interview. I'm curious what your reaction was to what you heard from Mr. Navarro.
Well, my reaction to Mr. Navarro's statements is that this fulfills a prediction I had made, which is that the actions of the coup plotters would eventually conflict with the actions of the insurrectionists. They had conjured up this nightmare of mass street violence and a fascist movement, and the coup plotters thought that they had a much more delicate chess-like arrangement on the inside. They thought that they could thwart Biden's Electoral College victory of 306 by rejecting Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, lowering it below 270, and kicking the whole contest into the House of Representatives for a so-called contingent election under the 12th Amendment. And so it was inevitable that people like Peter Navarro would end up blaming the violent insurrection for interfering with their designs for stealing the election on the inside.
And suggesting that Vice President Pence fumbled the ball right at the goal line when they were trying to finish their play, as they called it, a Green Bay sweep. Congressman, good morning. It's Willie Geist. So much, as you say, this is out in the open. We've heard public statements from President Trump and from many of the people around him. We've had so much media reporting over the last year about what was going on in the days leading up to January 6th and then on that day. But what more can you tell us this morning about the role that the president himself, then President Donald Trump, played on that day? Who was he talking to that day? What were the conversations like inside the West Wing, inside the Oval Office?
Well, that's probably the final piece of the puzzle that we haven't quite put in place yet. You know, we've had overwhelming cooperation and participation by witnesses up and down the line, except right when you get to the inner coterie and entourage surrounding former President Trump himself. And that's where we've, run into a little bit of a brick wall with Steve Bannon, kind of Mark Meadows, who had 1 foot in and 1 foot out, Roger Stone, and a couple of the other key players right there. But essentially, with Donald Trump, it is sufficient usually to follow his public pronouncements and his public conduct. And he had been whipping up a violent frenzy in the streets at the rally where he said, "We never give up. You never give up when there's fraud involved. You've got to go and fight like hell," and so on. All of that was perfectly obvious what he was doing. But what has come out, of course, is the inside strategy of trying to destroy Biden's electoral college majority and kicking the whole thing into a contingent election, at which point they would have declared Trump the victor, and then he probably would have invoked the Insurrection Act, declared something like martial law, and then tried to call in the National Guard to put down the insurrection and the chaos he had unleashed against us.
Congressman Raskin, good morning. It's Jonathan Lemire. There's some new reporting today, including from Axios, that suggests that the House Select Committee here on January 6th is considering some primetime hearings to draw more attention, to capture America's eyes on the work you are doing right around now, the 1-year anniversary. Can you talk to us about whether that's true and what the next steps of the committee might be?
Well, I have favored this strategy from the beginning. I remember as a kid getting to watch a bit of the Watergate hearings, which were a daily spectacle that the whole country tuned into. And if we can do that for, a break-in at a couple of offices in the Watergate Hotel, certainly we can do it for a massive break-in to the Capitol of the United States, a storming and a seizure, essentially, of our governmental offices, an interruption of the peaceful transfer of power in an attempt to overturn the results of an American presidential election.
Congressman Raskin, you were the lead impeachment manager for former President Donald Trump's second impeachment trial. We want to get your reaction to something Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas said late last month. He said it on a podcast that the odds are very high that President Biden will be impeached should Republicans retake the House in this year's election. Listen to what he said.
The Democrats weaponized impeachment. They used it for partisan purposes to go after Trump because they disagreed with him. And one of the real disadvantages of doing that, and this is something you and I talked about at great length, is the more you weaponize it and turn it into a partisan cudgel, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I said at the time, when we have a Democratic president and a Republican House, you can expect an impeachment proceeding.
Your reaction, Congressman?
Well, what a pathetic, sordid spectacle to see Ted Cruz utter words like that. I think he's a graduate of Harvard Law School, and he is a shame on my alma mater when he speaks like that. You don't raise impeachment because you don't like something that another Congress did. This is a guy who supported the impeachment of Bill Clinton for telling one lie about one act of sex, but could not bring himself to support the impeachment and the conviction of Donald Trump for inciting a violent insurrection against his own government, the worst action of a president against the U.S. government, against the people of the United States in the history of our country. And now, without even pretending to invoke a specific high crime and misdemeanor, he says we're just going to use impeachment against Joe Biden. He's the one, obviously, who's weaponizing impeachment. He's someone who betrayed his oath of office when he refused to act as an objective and dispassionate juror in the Senate trial. So I think that's pathetic.
Yeah.